Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I am going to show you how to make a cradle board for your painting. Now I normally get canvases, but once in a while I'll paint on wood because when I have a large piece that I want to paint, canvases are very expensive. So it is cheaper to make your own cradled canvases or boards, however you want to call it, than to go and spend $40 on a 4-foot by 8-foot canvas, stretch canvas. So I'm going to do this today. I've done it before, and here's one I did years ago, and it's still up, so it hasn't fallen apart. And basically what you need is a wooden panel. This is a mahogany plywood, and it's pre-sanded, and it's a 4 feet by 8 feet and 1/4 inch in thickness. I also had around the house some furring strips, and I normally keep this for artwork or any fix-ups in the house. So I'm going to be using this. These usually run about 8 feet long and 1.5 by 1/2 inch in width and height here. And you're going to need 2 if you're going to make such a large piece like I'm going to do here. You're going to need some glue. If you don't have this kind of glue, make sure you have something that is going to hold wood together. You're going to need a tape measure. These are, I believe these are 3/4 inch wire brad nails. You don't want them too long or too thick, because it needs to go through this and not come out on the other side. Also, you need your hammer. If you have a nail gun, more power to you, but I will be using a lot of hand tools today. Very easy to make. All you need to do is find a saw, or if you had a miter saw, you could cut these into pieces. You're going to measure, make sure that the measurement is right, is 4 feet by 8 feet, or whatever measurement you're going to make your canvas. And make sure that you have the right measurements for both areas, because sometimes these don't come out exactly the right measurement that they tell you they are. So you want to make sure that you have the right measurement. It'll be a lot less work for you. And another tip that I wanted to give you was, I ordered this online, and I normally go into the store and pick them myself because I will not get the ones that are so warped out like that. They will straighten out once I glue and nail them to the furring strips, but the thing is that it'll fight me. So if you're going to do this, it's better to go to the store and pick out the plywood yourself. Now, inspect it very carefully. Some of these do have knocks in them. Like, I prefer to paint on the brighter part, but it has knots, and I don't want to start using wood filler to repair anything. So I'm going to use this side, which is nice and sanded and smooth. Okay, so I went and cut the furring strips, and what I did was I measured from here to here and cut one furring strip, and then use this one as a guide to cut the opposite side. Then on these, you're going to measure from the inside, because these are going to go inside the frame. Okay, so what I did was I measured from here to the other end, and it came out to 45 inches. I cut one and used this one as a guide to cut the second one. But because now I'm having an issue with the warp in this panel, I had to place that temporarily on the middle of the panel. You could put books if you have the same situation that I have. And my problem is that normally I'll put the glue underneath here, and then I turn them to the other side and put the nails from the front where the painting is going to go. And then I fill the nail holes with putty or, wood filler or something, and lightly sand it. But because I'm having this warp issue, I'm going to have to improvise. I found that I had some of these, but I only have 4, and I'm going to need more. So this is not going to really help me. If you have those and you could hold down this piece of wood, then that would be perfect for you, because then you could just hold this panel down to this and flip it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some temporary nail here, like I'm going to put one here, one here, one here to hold this piece down, and I'm going to do the same for all the other ones after I glue them, then turn the panel over and nail them in the front. That way it'll keep this panel straight and held in place instead of buckling. So an hour later, and you say, what happened here? Okay, so I'm not going to edit this out. I'm going to show you exactly what happened. And this, first of all, I waited for half an hour and it was not enough for the glue to grip. And then I waited for an hour, and now what I had to do was place more things on top of it. Use the clamps that I had. I had a vice grip and the 4 clamps that I had, and I used that, but it wasn't enough. The furring strips kept pulling away from the panel, nails and all. I went ahead and put some more heavy things and a grip here to be able to hold down the furring strip to the plywood. And I waited an hour, and now we're going to go ahead and take all this out, flip it, and put some more nails on it. But I just wanted to show you what not to do. Don't order online for something like this, and always have clamps ready when you're working with wood. That's basically the advice I can give you right now. So let's get going. Now that the glue has finally dried up, and it did dry up really quickly. Normally in the past I use liquid nails, construction adhesive, and it worked just as fine. But this adhesive that I bought seems to work really quickly. So it glued it down once I had it pinned down and everything was not shifting or moving. I was able to go ahead and remove the clamps and all the other things that I had on top of it. I also turned it around and put some more nails around the perimeter. And it might have been an overkill because the glue is holding fairly well. So if you don't want to do that, you don't have to put nails on the other side. The only advice I can give you is that when you're doing this, leave it alone. Let the glue dry. Don't move it around because then you'll have these things popping off. Remember, these little nails are there to just keep this steady. And the nails will pop off and everything will separate from the panel. So make sure that you just leave everything intact until the glue dries, and then you're able to move it. Now, it's solid. It's not buckling anymore. And like I said, I put some nails around the perimeter. Now I'm going to get some wood putty or nail fillers and just cover up these holes. This is a nail setter that I use to push those nails inward, okay? So once I get with the putty in here, I'll sand it down lightly, the whole thing, and even the sides. Now, one thing I wanted to point out is that if you are planning to use this without any kind of a framing, you might want to go ahead and sand down nice and smooth this whole area all around it, and even gaps that you see, just make sure you put some filler, wood filler in there, and sand it again and make it nice and even, and then that way you'll have a nice even frame all around it. But I normally use, for a frame, lattice molding. Now, lattice molding comes in 1/4 inch in width and about 1.5 inch in from here to here, and they sell them either in by linear foot or by 8 feet. And what you do is, and I learned this in art school, you're going to cut these pieces to size, and you're going to nail this to the sides here. You use nail filler, sand it down, and then you can paint this. That's what I did with that one right there. And you'll have a frame all around. So that's what I'm going to be doing with this one right here. I'm going to show you an example of one I did a few years back, and it's still holding. And this is what I mean about the edges. I did some sanding and put some wood filler on any of the gaps. And after I finished sanding it, I primed the entire cradle board. Now on this one, I used mitered corners, and that was a pain because I don't have a very good miter. So I had to use some wood fillers. But you don't have to do it this way. You could do it the square way, where it just goes one way and then comes out this way. But I've had this for years. As you can see, it's still in good condition. Now you can use the mahogany plywood that I use on this one. You could also use MDF, but I don't recommend MDF too much because sometimes they use formaldehyde in their adhesives, and if you start sanding that stuff, that's cancerous. So if you're going to use MDF, then you're going to have to do your homework and find out if it doesn't have any formaldehyde in it. You could also use masonite as your wood panel, and that's what I've used on that one and another one that I have in my bedroom. And those are a lot easier to work with. The only thing is that sometimes you have to look for damages because the stores are not very gentle with them, and they could come back with corners all busted in. So but that's one option you can use. You don't have to go overboard in spending money using certain plywoods, but just try to stay away from the very cheap plywood, because then you'll have a lot of warping and a lot of knots that you need to have to repair before you do your painting. You want to have something very slick and easy to paint on. I use quilts all-purpose exterior and interior primer. And that's what I use on that one, and that's what I'm going to use on this one. So I'm going to sand everything, use the primer on the front and the back, because you want to protect the entire wood. And then you could either leave it with the primer, depending on what medium you're going to be using. If you're going to be using ink, you might just want to use the primer. But since I paint in oils and I also paint in acrylics, I like to have that extra protection. And after I prime it, I use some gesso and give it about 1, 2, maybe 3 coats on the top to preserve the wood. And I have not had any problems. The other tip I'm going to give you is try to stay away from brushes when you're doing gesso or when you're doing primer, because it leaves brush marks across your wood. So either use a sponge brush or a little sponge roller, and it'll come out a lot more smoother. And if you find any imperfections, you could always sand it down with like 200 grit or even higher to get a smooth finish. But if you're doing just alcohol inks, you could just use the primer from what I've heard and don't have to gesso it. That's just an added measure. So I'm going to go ahead and fill these holes, sand it a bit, prime it, gesso it. And all right, so what I did here was I primed the back and the front of the board, Cradle board, and I didn't sand the back, but I did when I gave the 2 coats to the front, I sanded it in between very lightly. And now we're going to go ahead and gesso just the front. Now get your gesso and either stir it very well or just shake the bottle a lot. And what you're going to do, just like you did with the priming, you're going to sand it in between coats, and always wipe it down after you sand it, because you don't want all that grittiness on top of your paintings. Now, since I already gave it 2 layers of primer, I'm just going to give it 2 layers of gesso. So we're done. I just finished putting 2 coats of gesso on it, and I sanded it in between with 220 grit sandpaper. I used the 220 with all the sanding that I did, and this cradle board is ready for painting. Now, some of you might say, oh, that's a lot of work to put into it. I'd rather buy the canvas. Well, if you can afford the canvas, that's fine. But when you have a large painting and those stretch canvases are very expensive, you might have to resort to doing something like this. So it's worth the effort, because your paintings will last many, many years. The painting I showed you earlier in the video, that painting is about 12 years old. The one I have in my bedroom is about 11 years old. So it is worth prepping your surface in order to get your paintings to last a long, long time. I thank you for watching, and I hope you subscribe to my channel. And that's it for this video.